I'm Daniel, a 42-year-old architect with a quiet life in Portland. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 16 years. She's 39, a graphic designer with a sharp wit and a smile that could light up a room. We met in college, back when I was sketching blueprints in the library and she was doodling logos on napkins. Our life together was comfortable. 2 kids, a craftsman house with a wraparound porch, and a routine that felt like a well-worn pair of shoes. I thought we were solid. I thought wrong. It started with little things I didn't notice at first. Emily's phone buzzing late at night, her quick glances at the screen before flipping it face down. She'd laugh it off, saying it was a client with a last-minute project, and I'd nod, trusting her. I'd always trusted her. She was my anchor, the one who kept our family humming along while I buried myself in deadlines and blueprints. But those late-night buzzes turned into secretive smiles, the kind she used to save for me. I'd catch her staring out the kitchen window, lost in thought, her fingers tapping the counter like she was waiting for something or someone. One Thursday, I came home early from a site visit. The kids were at soccer practice, and the house was quiet. Emily's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the living room or the kitchen. I called out, my voice echoing off the hardwood floors. No answer. I climbed the stairs, my boots heavy on the creaky steps, and heard it. A soft giggle from our bedroom. My stomach twisted. I pushed the door open, and there she was, sitting cross-legged on our bed. Phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and playful. She didn't see me at first. I can't wait to see you tomorrow, she whispered, twirling a strand of her auburn hair. When her eyes met mine, she froze, the color draining from her face. She stammered, Daniel, I didn't hear you come in, and hung up fast. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. The air between us felt like it had cracked. That night I couldn't sleep. Emily lay beside me, pretending nothing had happened, her breathing steady while my mind raced. Who was she talking to? Why did she sound so alive? I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past few months. Her sudden interest in yoga classes, the new perfume she'd started wearing, the way she'd pull away when I reached for her. I told myself it was nothing, that I was paranoid. But the seed was planted and it grew roots fast. The next morning, Emily acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, handed me my coffee, and shuffled the kids out the door for school. I watched her, searching for a telltale sign. A nervous twitch, a guilty glance. But she was smooth, polished, like she'd rehearsed this charade. I went to work, but my head wasn't in it. Blueprints blurred into meaningless lines as I replayed her voice. Asterisk, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Asterisk, tomorrow was Friday. I decided to find out what she meant. I called my assistant, told her I'd be out for the afternoon, and drove home. Emily's yoga class was at 6 p.m., or so she'd said. I parked down the street, waiting. At 5:45, her car pulled out of the driveway, but she didn't turn toward the studio. She headed downtown. My palms sweated as I followed, keeping my distance. She parked outside a sleek condo building, one I'd helped design years ago. My chest tightened. This wasn't yoga. She stepped out, her hair loose, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before. Black, fitted, nothing like the leggings she wore to class. She glanced around, then disappeared inside. I waited, my heart pounding, until I saw him, Mark, my old college buddy, the guy who'd crashed on our couch when his startup tanked. He strode up to the building, all swagger and gelled hair, and buzzed himself in. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, piecing it together. Mark, Emily, my wife and my friend. I didn't confront her that night. I needed proof, something solid to hold on to when the inevitable storm hit. I went home, poured a whiskey, and started digging. Emily's laptop was on the kitchen table, password protected, but I knew her habits. She used the same password for everything, our anniversary plus the kids' initials. I was in within minutes. Her email was clean, but her messaging app wasn't. Dozens of chats with Mark stretching back months. Flirty banter at first, then photos, her in lingerie, him shirtless by a pool. My hands shook as I scrolled. They'd been meeting every Friday, sometimes more. She'd lied to my face, over and over. I didn't sleep that night either. The messages burned into my brain. Every, I miss you. Every, you're my escape. Emily had built a whole secret life, and I'd been too blind to see it. Saturday morning, she breezed into the kitchen, humming, oblivious to the fact that I knew. I watched her pour cereal for the kids, her movements so casual, so infuriatingly normal. Busy day, I asked, my voice tight. She shrugged, just errands, and smiled. That smile, it was a dagger. I played along, nodding, sipping my coffee while my insides churned. The kids finished breakfast, and she shooed them upstairs to get ready for a playdate. Alone with her, I almost cracked. I wanted to slam the laptop down, demand answers, but I held back. Revenge wasn't about confrontation, not yet. It was about control, about turning her betrayal into something I could wield. That afternoon, she left for her errands. I tracked her phone, something I'd never done before, but the app was there, linked to our family plan. She wasn't at the grocery store. She was at Mark's condo again. I pictured them together, laughing, touching, and my vision blurred with rage. But I didn't storm over. I went to the garage, pulled out my old toolbox, and started planning. If she wanted to play this game, I'd rewrite the rules. I called a PI I knew from a work project, a guy named Vince who owed me a favor. I need discreet surveillance, I told him. My wife, a guy named Mark Tanner. Everything you can get. Photos, audio, timestamps. Vince didn't ask questions. He just said, give me a week, and hung up. I spent the rest of the day researching divorce laws, asset division, custody battles. Emily wasn't just cheating. She was risking everything we'd built. I'd make sure she lost more than she bargained for. Vince worked fast. By Tuesday, he emailed me a zip file, grainy photos of Emily and Mark at a cafe, her hand on his arm. Audio clips of hushed phone calls. A time-stamped log of their meetups. The most damning was a video from Monday night, shot through Mark's condo window. Emily, in that black dress, laughing as he pulled her close. My stomach lurched, but I watched it twice, memorizing every frame. This wasn't a fling. This was a betrayal carved in stone. I kept up the act at home, kissing her goodnight, asking about her day, while my mind spun with plans. I transferred half our savings into a new account she couldn't touch. I met with a lawyer, a shark named Claire who specialized in blindsiding unfaithful spouses. We'll bury her, Claire said, flipping through Vince's evidence. Adultery still sways judges here. You'll keep the house, the kids, most of the assets. I nodded, but it wasn't enough. Money and custody wouldn't heal the gash Emily had ripped open. I wanted her to feel it, really feel it. I started small. I canceled her credit cards, claiming a security breach. She complained, but I played dumb, promising to fix it. I swapped her perfume with a cheap knockoff, watching her wrinkle her nose in confusion. Petty, sure, but it was a warm-up. The real blow was coming. I dug into Mark's life next. His startup was floundering, propped up by a shaky loan. I knew the bank's VP from a project years back. One call and Mark's financial lifeline was on thin ice. Emily didn't know it yet, but her perfect little bubble was about to pop. Wednesday night, Emily came home late, her cheeks flushed, her excuse flimsy. Some client dinner. I didn't call her out. I just smiled, handed her a glass of wine, and watched her sip it, oblivious to the storm brewing. Thursday, I upped the ante. I hacked into her work email, same password trick, and forwarded a flirty exchange with Mark to her boss, a prudish guy named Greg. By noon, she texted me, frantic. Greg just called me into his office. Someone sent him weird emails. What's going on? I replied, no idea, babe. Hackers, maybe? She bought it, but the damage was done. Greg put her on probation, citing professional conduct. That night, she cried in the bathroom, thinking I couldn't hear. I stood outside the door, listening, feeling a twisted mix of satisfaction and guilt. She'd brought this on herself, I reasoned. But it wasn't enough. Friday, Mark's loan got yanked. My bank contact came through. His startup imploded overnight, and Emily's phone lit up with his panicked texts. She paced the living room, muttering excuses about needing to help a friend. And I let her go, knowing she'd run straight to him. I followed again, parking outside his condo. Through the window, I saw them arguing, her gesturing wildly, him slouched on the couch, defeated. She'd picked a loser, and now his collapse was dragging her down. I drove home, poured another whiskey, and started sketching the next phase. Emily thought she could have it all, me as the steady husband, Mark as the thrilling escape. She was wrong. I'd dismantle her world, piece by piece, until she had nothing left to hold on to. And I was just getting started. By Saturday morning, Emily was a mess. She stumbled into the kitchen, eyes puffy, hair tangled, claiming she'd been up late working. I knew better. Mark's texts had kept her phone buzzing all night. Desperate pleas for help, rants about his ruined business. I poured her coffee, my face a mask of concern, and asked, "Rough night?" She nodded, avoiding my gaze, and muttered something about a tight deadline. The lies were piling up, and I could almost smell them on her breath. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The trap was already closing. I spent the day with the kids, taking them to the park while Emily stayed home, supposedly catching up on sleep. I used the time to call Vince again. "I need more," I told him. "Dig into Mark's past. Debts, exes, anything I can use." Vince grunted, "On it." And I hung up, watching my son kick a soccer ball, my daughter chasing butterflies. They deserved better than a mother who'd trade our family for a cheap thrill. I'd make sure they got it. That evening, Emily announced she was meeting a friend for dinner. I didn't blink, just kissed her forehead and said, "Have fun." She hesitated, like she expected me to argue, but I'd learned silence was sharper than words. She left, and I waited 10 minutes before tracking her phone. Mark's condo again. Predictable. I opened my laptop and pulled up the footage Vince had sent earlier, hours of them together, oblivious to the world. I burned it onto a USB drive, labeled it Memories, and tucked it away. Evidence was my ammunition, and I was stockpiling. Sunday, Vince delivered. Mark had a history, unpaid taxes, a restraining order from an ex-girlfriend, a DUI he'd buried. Small potatoes, but enough to twist the knife. I emailed the ex, posing as a concerned friend, and dropped hints about Mark's new fling. She bit, replying with a tirade about his lies and temper. Perfect. I forwarded it to Emily's work email, knowing Greg would see it when she logged in Monday. Her probation was already shaky. This would tip it over the edge. Monday morning, Emily left for work in a daze. I waved her off, then checked her phone's location. She was at the office, but not for long. By 10 a.m., she called me, voice trembling. "Greg fired me," she said. "He said I'm a liability." Something about inappropriate emails again. I feigned shock, murmuring sympathies while my pulse raced with dark glee. "That's awful, Em. We'll figure it out." She didn't suspect me, not yet. She blamed hackers, bad luck, anything but the truth staring her in the face. She came home early, collapsing on the couch, her confidence shattered. I played the dutiful husband, bringing her tea, rubbing her shoulders, all while plotting the next move. Mark's world was crumbling too. His landlord had texted Emily about eviction, and she'd forwarded it to him in a panic. I'd nudged that along, tipping off the building manager about Mark's financial mess. 2 birds, 1 stone. Emily was clinging to a sinking ship, and I was the one drilling the holes. That night, she tried to talk to me, really talk. "Daniel, I feel like everything's falling apart," she whispered, her eyes searching mine. I wanted to scream, to throw the USB drive at her and watch her squirm, but I held back. "It'll get better," I lied, squeezing her hand. She nodded, trusting me like she always had, blind to the fact that I was the architect of her ruin. After she fell asleep, I slipped out to the garage and called Claire, my lawyer. "Start the papers," I said. "I want it airtight." She chuckled. "Oh, it'll be a masterpiece." Tuesday, I upped the stakes. I contacted a friend at the local paper, a guy who owed me for a favor years back. I leaked a story, anonymous of course, about Mark's failed startup, his debts, his questionable personal life. By Wednesday, it was online, complete with a blurry photo of him and Emily at that cafe. Her name wasn't mentioned, but anyone who knew us would connect the dots. She saw it that afternoon and freaked, pacing the kitchen, muttering about small-town gossip. I shrugged. People talk, Em. Nothing we can do. Thursday, the fallout hit hard. Emily's phone buzzed nonstop. Friends texting about the article, asking if it was her, if Mark was that guy. She denied it, but her voice cracked, her hands shook. I watched from the dining table, sipping coffee, as she unraveled. The kids were at school, oblivious, but I knew the whispers would reach them soon. Emily's perfect image, PDA mom, talented designer, was crumbling and I'd lit the match. She tried calling Mark, but he didn't pick up. I'd already checked. His phone was off, probably dead from overuse as he begged for loans. She left a voicemail, her tone desperate. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. I deleted it from her phone later, using her fingerprint while she slept. She'd think he was ghosting her, and the abandonment would sting worse than the truth. Friday, I took it further. I printed flyers, nothing fancy, just the article's headline and that cafe photo, with Cheater's Paradise scrawled across it. I paid a kid from the neighborhood to plaster them around Mark's building and Emily's old yoga studio. By evening, she got a call from her friend Sarah, who'd seen one. What's going on? Sarah asked, loud enough for me to hear. Emily stammered, it's a mistake, and hung up, tears streaming down her face. I offered a tissue, my voice soft. Rough day, huh? She glared at me, suspicion flickering, but she had no proof. That night, she didn't leave the house. She curled up on the couch, staring at her phone, refreshing Mark's dead social media. I sat across from her, sketching a new project, pretending not to notice her misery. The kids came home, chattering about their day, and I sent them to bed early. Emily barely looked at them. Her world was shrinking, and I was the unseen hand squeezing it tight. Saturday, Emily tried to rally. She called her sister, Jen, begging for a loan to help a friend. Jen hesitated. Emily's story was thin, and the article had already spread. I don't know, Jen said over speakerphone. This Mark guy sounds like trouble. Emily snapped, it's not about him. But Jen hung up, unconvinced. I watched from the hallway, silent, as Emily threw her phone across the room. Cracked against the wall, a fitting metaphor for her life. Friends stopped texting. Her social circle, once tight-knit, went quiet. The flyers had done their job, rumors swirled, and people distanced themselves. She tried reaching out, but the responses were curt, guarded. I overheard her pleading with Sarah. You know me. This isn't who I am. Sarah's reply was cold. I thought I knew you. Emily sobbed after that, locked in the bathroom for hours. I didn't knock. I didn't care. Mark finally surfaced Sunday, texting her from a new number. I'm crashing with a buddy. Need space. She stared at the message, her face crumpling. I'd gotten to him too. Vince had tracked his new hideout and I'd sent an anonymous tip to his ex who'd shown up screaming the night before. He was running on fumes and Emily was collateral damage. She typed a reply, then deleted it, her fingers trembling. I brewed tea, handed her a mug, and said, You okay? She nodded weakly, but her eyes were hollow. Monday, Claire called. The divorce papers were ready, adultery cited, full custody requested, assets heavily favoring me. I told her to hold off serving them. I wanted Emily to stew longer, to feel the walls closing in before the final blow. She went through the day like a ghost, barely speaking, jumping at every noise. The kids noticed, asking, What's wrong with Mom? I brushed it off. She's just tired. They didn't push, but their frowns cut deeper than I'd expected. Tuesday, Emily cracked. She cornered me in the kitchen, voice shaking. Daniel, did you do this? The emails, the article, all of it. Her eyes were wild, searching for a confession. I leaned against the counter, calm, and said, What are you talking about, Em? Why would I hurt you? She faltered, doubt creeping in. She had no proof, just a gut feeling I'd nurtured into paranoia. I don't know, she whispered, backing off. I don't know. She spent the day digging, checking her laptop, her phone, trying to trace the chaos. I'd covered my tracks well. She found nothing. By evening, she was frantic, muttering about conspiracies, hackers, Mark's enemies. I listened, nodding, letting her spin herself dizzy. Then I struck again. I slipped the USB drive into her purse, labeled side up, and waited. She found it that night, plugged it into her laptop, and gasped. The footage, her and Mark, undeniable, played in silence. She turned to me, pale, and croaked, "Where did this come from?" I shrugged, feigning confusion. "No idea. Looks old, though." It wasn't old, but she didn't know that. She ejected it, hands shaking, and threw it in the trash. She didn't sleep that night. I heard her pacing, crying, unraveling. Wednesday morning, she confronted me again. "You know, don't you?" she said, voice raw. "About Mark." I met her gaze steady and said, "Should I?" She broke, sobbing, spilling half-truths. How it just happened. How she'd planned to end it. I listened, stone-faced, then walked away. She'd confessed, but it changed nothing. The endgame was near. Emily's confession hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Wednesday afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table, head in her hands, her words still echoing in my skull. It just happened. I'd walked away, leaving her there, but the silence that followed was louder than her tears. She didn't follow me, didn't beg for forgiveness. Maybe she knew it was too late. I retreated to the garage, my sanctuary, and sat among my tools, staring at the USB drive I'd fished from the trash. She thought she'd destroyed it, but I'd made copies. Her secrets weren't hers to bury. That night, she tried to act normal. Cooking dinner, asking the kids about school. But her hands shook as she stirred the pasta. I watched, saying nothing, letting her squirm. The kids picked up on it, their chatter fading into awkward glances. "Mom, you okay?" my daughter asked. Emily forced a smile. "Just tired, sweetie?" But her voice cracked. I didn't rescue her. Let her drown in it, I thought. After they went to bed, she approached me, tentative. "Daniel, we need to talk." I nodded, sitting on the couch, arms crossed. She spilled more. How Mark had been a mistake. How she'd felt trapped in our routine. I listened, my face blank, until she finished. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I stood, looked her in the eye and said, "I know." Then I went to bed, leaving her alone with her guilt. Thursday, she was a shadow, moving slow, eyes red, jumping at every sound. I kept up my act, kissing her goodbye as I left for work, but my mind was on Claire. I called her from the site. "Serve her tomorrow," I said. "No more delays." Claire agreed, her tone sharp with anticipation. I spent the day drafting plans, but my thoughts were on Emily. How she'd react when the papers hit, how her world would implode. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. That evening, I took the kids to a movie, giving Emily space to stew. When we got back, she was on the phone, whispering furiously. I caught Mark's name before she hung up, flustered. "Who was that?" I asked casual. "Just Jen," she lied, her eyes darting. I nodded, letting it slide. She didn't know I tapped her phone weeks ago. Vince's handiwork. Mark had begged her to meet, claiming he was fixing things. She'd refused, sounding scared. Good. Fear was progress. Friday morning, I left early, telling Emily I had a meeting. She barely looked up from her coffee, her face drawn. At 10 a.m., Claire texted, "Process server's on his way." I pictured it. The knock, the envelope, her confusion turning to dread. I waited, checking my phone every few minutes until she called at 10:47. "Daniel, what is this?" Her voice was shrill, panicked. "Divorce papers? Custody? What are you doing?" I kept my tone even. "I think you know why, Em." She sputtered, "We can fix this." I hung up, my pulse steady. No fixing this. She blew up my phone. Texts, voicemails, please to talk. I ignored them, focusing on a blueprint until my hands stopped shaking. When I got home, she was waiting, papers crumpled in her fist. You can't do this, she said, tears streaming. The kids, the house. You can't take everything. I met her gaze cold. You did this, Emily. Not me. She lunged at me, sobbing, grabbing my shirt. I stepped back, letting her collapse on the floor. The kids were at a friend's house. I'd planned it that way. No witnesses to her breakdown. She spent the night begging, promising to end it with Mark, to go to therapy. I listened, unmoved, then slept in the guest room. Saturday she tried a new tack, anger. You're ruining us, she shouted, slamming drawers. You think you're perfect? I didn't bite. Sign the papers, I said calm. It's done. She stormed out, probably to Mark, but I didn't follow. I called Claire instead. She's fighting it, I said. Claire laughed. She won't win. Sunday, the kids came home, sensing the tension. Emily tried to play happy mom, but her smiles were brittle. I pulled them aside, gentle. Mom and I are having some grown-up problems. We'll figure it out. They nodded, trusting me, and my resolve hardened. Emily had betrayed them too. She just didn't see it yet. Monday, Emily hired a lawyer, a cheap one, judging by the typos in the counterclaim Vince dug up. She wanted half the assets, joint custody, no alimony. Delusional. Claire shredded it in an hour, citing the adultery evidence, the financial moves I'd made. She's got nothing, Claire said. Judge'll laugh her out of court. I nodded, but victory felt hollow. I wanted more than a legal win. I wanted her broken. Tuesday, Mark showed up. I was in the driveway, fixing a flat tire, when his beat-up sedan rolled in. He looked rough, unshaven, eyes sunken. Dan, we need to talk, he said, hands up like I might swing. I stood, wrench in hand, and waited. I'm sorry, man. It got out of control. I'll back off. Too late. I stepped closer, voice low. You think an apology fixes this? You're done here. He flinched, nodded, and drove off. Emily watched from the window, pale, then disappeared inside. That night, she tried one last plea. I'll leave Mark, she said, voice small. I'll do anything. I looked at her, really looked, and saw a stranger. You already left, I said, walking away. Wednesday, I leaked the USB footage online, anonymous, tagged with Mark's name. By Thursday, it was viral, local forums buzzing, his ex chiming in with venom. Emily's face was blurred, but she knew. She locked herself in the bedroom, sobbing, as the kids asked why Mom wouldn't come out. I shrugged. She's not feeling well. Friday, her lawyer called mine, begging to settle. She'd sign anything. Full custody, minimal assets, no fight. She just wanted out. I agreed, but not before one last twist. I sent the footage to her parents, her sister, her old college friends. Everyone she'd lied to. The emails were simple. This is who she is. By Saturday, her phone was silent. No one called back. Sunday, Emily packed. She moved slow, folding clothes into a suitcase, avoiding my gaze. The kids watched, confused, as I explained. Mom's going to live somewhere else for a while. They cried, hugging her, and she broke down, promising to visit. I didn't stop them, let her feel that loss. She left that afternoon, her car stuffed with bags. No goodbye for me. I stood on the porch, watching her taillights fade, and felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just a void where our life used to be. Monday, the divorce finalized. Claire called, triumphant. You got everything. House, kids, 80% of the savings. She's got a car and a pittance. I thanked her, hung up, and poured a whiskey. The house was quiet, the kids at school, and I wandered through rooms that felt foreign. Emily's perfume lingered, a ghost I couldn't banish. I'd won, but it didn't fill the hole. Mark vanished. Rumors said he'd left town, chased by debt and shame. Good riddance. Emily moved into a cheap apartment downtown, Vince reported. She'd found a part-time gig, barely scraping by. Her friends, her family. They'd cut her off, poisoned by the truth I'd spread. I'd dismantled her life, brick by brick, and she'd never recover. But neither would I, not really. Tuesday, the kids asked when Mom was coming back. I lied, soon, and hated myself for it. They'd learn eventually. Her visits would taper off, her excuses would pile up. I'd be their rock, their constant, but the weight of it crushed me. Revenge had been meticulous, cruel, perfect, and it left me empty. Weeks passed. March turned to April, and the kids adjusted school, soccer, bedtime stories without her. I kept busy, work swallowing my days, but nights were brutal. I'd sit on the porch, whiskey in hand, replaying it all, her laugh on the phone, the footage, her tears. I'd wanted her to suffer, and she had, more than I'd imagined. But the mirror was unforgiving. I'd become something cold, calculating, a man I barely recognized. Emily called once, mid-April, asking to see the kids. I agreed, supervised, and watched her hug them like she'd never let go. She looked thin, tired, a shadow of the woman I'd loved. "I'm sorry, Daniel," she said, quiet. I nodded, said nothing. Sorry didn't rebuild trust, didn't erase Mark's hands on her. She left after an hour, promising to call again. She didn't. By May, I heard she'd moved again, out of state, chasing a fresh start. The kids stopped asking about her, their questions fading into silence. I sold the house, too big for three, and bought a smaller place, a clean slate. Life moved on, mechanical, routine. I'd gotten my revenge, a masterpiece of ruin, but the cost was steep. Emily was gone. Mark was a memory, and I was left with victory's bitter taste. Sharp, hollow, and mine alone.